Today, we're going to be talking about trauma bonds and some of the things we will hear ourselves saying to ourselves when we are in a trauma bonded situation with someone like a narcissist. So let's break down what a trauma bond is. So if you have a trauma bond with an abusive person, then you have been experiencing intermittent reinforcement. So one day things are really good and the next day things are really bad. Or you have a period of things being really awesome and the person you're dealing with reinforces you. There's this positive reinforcement, there's positive validation. You're praised on one day, but then in the periods of your relationship when it gets really dark, things get really sour and sometimes very, very quickly and sometimes very dark. And what happens is you don't even realize that you're being pulled into an abusive cycle. And so it's important that you recognize that there's this intermittent validation or inconsistent validation over time. And so what's happening? What's happening is you're being primed to seek validation. And you're also being primed to fear a negative outcome. This is what I call the codependent hamster's wheel. So what happens in an abusive relationship is that there are two things that are going on primarily. A, you seek validation. And this is where you're getting your sense of pleasure from, right? So your mind is being primed to think it's good to get validation. So you're associating pleasure with that. But on the flip side of that, you're associating pain with a negative outcome. And so if you're dealing with someone who's abusive, you are at the same time being primed to seek their validation. Good boy, good girl. And at the same time, you're being primed or brainwashed to fear the outcome or to fear the negative outcome from disappointing this abusive person. So in a trauma bond situation, there are a number of things that take place. So let's break them down. If you're in a trauma bonded situation, you are someone who most likely makes excuses for an abusive person. So when people try to interfere, you go right into protecting or defending the person who is putting you down or who is abusing you in a different way. So you end up defending the abuser. Number two, if there is some type of a dependency on the abuser, let's say there's some financial dependence on the abuser, then it's going to be much easier for you, because you're in a vulnerable situation, to rationalize the abuser's behavior. Number three, there's an unhealthy attachment. Although you may recognize, oh, this relationship isn't all that healthy, you literally have an unhealthy attachment to this person. And when you have an unhealthy attachment to this person, for instance, let's say your mother is abusive, it's going to be easier for you to rationalize her behavior than it would be if you had a much healthier attachment with your mom. When we have unhealthy attachments to our parents, we often develop symptoms of codependency. And so we are fawning, we are people pleasing, and these are the ways we're trying to avoid upsetting a narcissistic parent, like a narcissistic mom. And this is also the way we get to avoid our own negative feelings about the abuser. Number four, which is really sad and something that we all have to recognize, and we don't when we are in the throes of a trauma bond, is that a narcissist or a highly manipulative person gets the victim to assume responsibility for the abuse. So you are being completely yelled at, narcissistic rage from your girlfriend or your boyfriend, then you were basically brainwashed to believe that it was all your fault for the narcissistic rage. It was all your fault for their accusations. It was all your fault that they cheated on you. It was all your fault that they left, or that they called you names, or they were mean to your children. It was all your fault. And so this is a concept of trauma bonds that is very, very familiar to those of us who have come from abusive narcissistic relationships. You will be brainwashed to believe it's all your fault. So in order for a trauma bond to take hold, certain criteria has to be evident. And number one is that you have to be afraid. So there is an absolute threat in this situation. So you perceive going against the narcissist as a threat. Something bad's going to happen. So your brain is hijacked with fear And that's what this trauma bond is really all about. The bond is fear. You're afraid of what's going to happen if this person gets upset or perceives you in a way that is untrue and triggers them. Number two is that you experience harsh treatment, but you also experience moments of pleasure, which is why you're so confused. So if a narcissist was cruel to you all the time, you wouldn't be in a trauma bond. The problem is that you're in a relationship with someone who is abusive, and then you experience moments of pleasantries. So maybe they bring home flowers, or maybe they create a picnic situation for you, or maybe they hire a limousine and you go out on a night on the town. These experiences are confusing you. They make you hold on. Another aspect of the trauma bond situation is when you begin to isolate yourself from people who are telling you what you don't want to hear. So your sister's saying, I think your boyfriend's abusive, and you stop hanging out with your sister. Or your best friend says, I think that girl is abusive towards you, like you don't hang out with us anymore, like she embarrasses you in front of your friends and your family, and you start to push them away. You don't want to hear what they have to say. It's so sad, but another aspect of this whole trauma bonding situation is you believe that you're in a situation that you can't leave. Like you feel like you can't escape this situation. You feel helpless to the situation, and you feel powerless. Remember, we're talking about a bond, a traumatic bond. So what happens with someone who is abusive and you call them out on it? What happens, and this also reinforces the trauma bond, is that they promise to change. So you've had a blowout with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, and they've embarrassed you in front of some friends. They've done some really shady stuff. You've caught them cheating. You caught them in a lie red-handed. You caught them stealing your car, writing out checks in your name, right? All sorts of nonsense, right? This is after they've taken you on a trip to Acapulco that you paid for and you haven't figured out yet. But I'm just saying, this is the craziness, the up and the down of a trauma bond. So what will happen is that when you catch an abusive person like a narcissist in a situation red-handed, they might agree to change. They might cry. They might tell you how sorry they are, and they commit to change. But if you pay attention, if you stand on the moon, as I like to say, and you observe the pattern in your relationship, what you will notice over time is that they never change. And their hope, when they tell you that they're going to change, this actually reinforces your commitment to them, because now it's like future faking. Now you're holding on to the possibility that things are going to get better soon. So what are the signs of a trauma bond? So the signs of a trauma bond are that you're in an abusive relationship and you're making excuses for it, and you're taking responsibility for it. You're pushing people away who want to help you. Friends and family are very concerned about you, and you're isolating yourself off. And the person who's abusing you is also wanting to isolate you from friends and family as well. You will defend an abuser, and you'll feel too frozen to end it. You'll feel like, I've invested so much time. I know this person is going to change. I know this person is only this way under certain situations. There's a lot of excuses. You feel afraid. Now, this is the thing. When we are in a trauma bonded situation, oftentimes we're taught that our reality is irrelevant. We don't pay attention to the way that we feel. And so we doubt that we feel what we feel. And so we're not tapping into the fear. The fear below the veil of consciousness is motivating our behavior, our seeking approval behavior. It's motivating our hope, right? Oh, things will get better soon. All I have to do is make sure that his potatoes are hot enough, and make sure that I don't upset her by talking about this, and make sure I put my shoes in the closet just the way he or she wants me to, and I can't leave a fork on the table because that might turn her narcissistic rage on. So if I do all of these things, then I can avoid this negative outcome. The problem is, and this is one of the reasons I like to create content like this, is because you need to become aware of how you're feeling. So if you are in fear, you might not even know you're in fear. Below the veil of consciousness, you're just going right into people-pleasing behavior. You're going right into like survivor behavior, fawning, rescuing, enabling, detaching from your own emotions, trying to keep your eye on the narcissist, trying to anticipate the narcissist's needs. I watched my mother live her whole life this way. I'm telling you, this is what happens. You lose yourself, and you get caught up on this codependent hamster's wheel. And it is seeking approval and fearing a negative outcome by an abusive person. So what are some of the things that we say to ourselves when we are in a trauma bond with a narcissist? Well, if you've ever heard yourself say, she doesn't always act like this, she only gets this upset when I don't do what she wants me to do. He acts this way because he loves me. This is why he's so angry. No one understands our relationship. Our relationship is unique. And so just because she goes off on a tangent like this and she has this rage doesn't mean that our relationship is bad. You don't understand the connection we have. If I didn't say that, then he wouldn't have flown off the handle. She said these things and she behaved this way because I made her angry. He always says he's sorry after he does this, so I know he loves me and I know eventually in time he's going to change. If you've heard someone say, or if you have said, I know things are going to get better, this is only happening because she lost her job. Or he only gets like this when he's drinking. Or he came from a dysfunctional home. That's why he has all these problems. That's why he can't keep a job. That's why he's so frustrated. That's why he threw a beer can through the window. It's all because he's frustrated. You know, his father was an alcoholic and he gets highly upset because he doesn't have a job. He can't keep a job. So of course he's upset. So he yells at the kids, no bueno. In all of that, what you're hearing is rationalization and justifications for poor behavior. And so this is what we need to pay attention to, not only in ourselves, but when we hear this in family members, what you're hearing is basically a rationalization of poor behavior. So how do we break a trauma bond? Well, you know, if you want to break anything, you have to understand it, right? So if you want to break up some concrete, you know that you need a jackhammer, right? Because of what concrete is. If you have some glue on your table, let's say some tape that is stuck to your table, you might want to use some vinegar to release the bond the glue has on the table. And so you're basically looking at the trauma bond very analytically. What is this all about? So the trauma bond is basically all about manipulation, but it's mostly rooted in fear. So it's rooted in the fear of abandonment. It's rooted in the fear of making this other person upset. It's rooted in the fear of a negative outcome. And so we have to understand that any time that we are trauma bonded, we are making someone else our God. We are putting a false God before ourselves. This is what we're doing. We're saying that, you know, how you treat me is okay, and I should tolerate any form of abuse because you're above me, and I just have to go along with the program. I just have to tolerate it. I should never question it because I have no right to do that, right? Now, we're giving our rights over to the other person. Now, this just doesn't happen all by itself. If you've come from a dysfunctional home and you've been taught that your feelings don't matter, you don't trust yourself. That's no bueno, right? If you've been bullied by a narcissistic mom who called you selfish, who called you a drama queen, when you are in a relationship with a narcissist who then says to you, you're a drama queen, you will recoil. And you will very much feel like that 3 or 4 year old little girl, little boy who was shamed in childhood. You will not, if you're below the veil of consciousness, recognize that you've been marginalized, that you have been minimized, or that you've been devalued. We have to recognize that trauma bonds are not based in reality, that you are in a relationship perhaps with someone who promises to change and they never change. You are in a relationship with someone who lies to you. You are in a relationship with someone who cannot listen to you, who takes no responsibility, who takes no accountability, and who exploits your emotions, who feels entitled to exploit you emotionally. For me, the telltale sign of narcissism is someone who is unwilling to listen to you, and then when you are at your lowest point, they pull out the sharpest emotional weapon, which is something that you shared with them during a vulnerable moment. So maybe you told them that you had a fallout with one of your best friends as a kid, and they hang it over your head. And whenever you are at your lowest point, they come at and they use this weapon against you. Or if they are losing the argument and they really want to do some damage, they want to throw you off your game, they want to exploit you emotionally, they want to fry your brain, they want to hurt you so bad that it's like pouring gasoline on a fire. They want to see you explode. because then they get to see, she's crazy. See, he's overreactive, right? No accountability for what they said and the way they tried to emotionally hurt you. No. The goal is to throw you off your game and to find something from the past that you shared with them that is a sharp, shiny object that they can hurt you with when they're losing an argument, or if they really, really, really want to hurt you and they feel like you think you're gaining some power or attraction in the relationship. So trauma bonds are not based in reality. They're all based on fantasy thinking that you're responsible for something that you're not responsible for, based on this idea that this person, it's okay that this person is treating you this way, so you have empathy and sympathy for this person. You're rationalizing poor behavior. That's not based in reality. Let me say that again. That is not based in reality. You thinking that this person is going to change because you're accepting poor behavior is not based in reality. That is not factual. In fact, people like that get worse. When you enable someone's poor behavior, they get worse. It's like the blob, right? So they just consume everything in their way. So you start excusing the way they treat you. Then they start abusing your kids and you're making excuses for that. Then they start abusing your mom or your sister or your friends, and that's it. They just go. So this idea that you are in a trauma bonded situation and you are making excuses for the behavior and the backstory in your mind, oh, well, they're only this way because they're hungry, or they're only this way because they had a poor childhood. You're making excuses, and all I have to do is love this person and not make them angry, and everything's going to be okay. That is a complete fabrication. That is like fairy tale nonsense. It's whimsical thinking. It's not factual. So if you really want to break a trauma bond, it's time for you to accept you're not living in reality, and you have to start thinking more factually. You have to start collecting data, and you have to start looking at this situation more logically and less emotionally. So how can you do that? How can you think less with your emotional brain and more with your rational brain? I like data. And so sit down at your desk, get out a journal, and think about all the times this person has said they're sorry and never changed. Think about all the times you've caught this person in a lie and they just continue to lie. Think about all the times this person has cheated. Think about all the times this person said they were going to do X, Y, and Z and they never did it. Think about the times you lent this person money and they never returned the money, but they always had a story for when they were going to return the money, right? So you want to start collecting data. When did this person explode? How did it make you feel? Who was there? Collect the data. On what date did it happen? What were you wearing? What was he or she wearing? What was the situation? Was it a coffee cup that you left on the coffee table, right? Was it that you didn't tell them about a doctor's appointment? Was it that you made a decision about the kids and didn't include them in the decision, and it was a minor decision like what color shoelaces are we putting in the kids' sneakers? Like, collect the data. That's going to help you decrease your emotions tied to the situation and increase your ability to see this thing more logically. Number 2, try to get in the habit of staying rooted in reality and shutty. Don't make excuses for poor behavior. Leave it there, right? When you're in a trauma bond and someone that you love that is abusive to you does something that you know they shouldn't have done, maybe they lied to your family and you know that they're lying, right? So you're standing there and you're frozen like, oh, she's lying, right? So rather than in your head go into rationalization mode, just for a moment, leave the lie out there. Imagine that this abusive person is in their own psychological condom, if you will, and you are learning to let go. You are learning to accept that this person is generating their own karma, and you are no longer taking responsibility or accountability for what comes out of their mouth, and you're no longer rationalizing their poor behavior. Just begin to try to stop making excuses for their poor behavior in the now. Make sure that you find support. Trauma bonds are extremely difficult to break because we're talking about the mechanism of pain versus pleasure, which is a default setting of the brain. This is some true hokey pokey subconscious stuff, right? So that's why you'll always hear me say that if you want to heal, you have to raise your level of consciousness around what it is you want to change, because the brain is habitual. thinking is habitual, right? And so if I've been conditioned by a manipulative person to be afraid to open my mouth, then below the veil of consciousness, I'm stuffing my feelings. If I have been conditioned to be afraid to speak up and say, hey, I don't like that, because the narcissist is going to call me names, I'm not going to speak up. If I've been conditioned to believe that everything's my fault, then I'm going to, below the veil of consciousness, subconsciously, do everything I can to fawn and people please, acquiesce, and to basically make this other person my God, live to make this other person happy. I'm not going to honor my feelings. I won't know how to. So it's really, really important that we stop making excuses and that we find the support we need to help us stay rooted in the reality of this idea that we're really in an abusive relationship and we need help. You're really going to also allow yourself to grieve, because when you're in a trauma bond, it's all about the future. Things are going to get better when. She is going to feel better when. He is going to be great when. When our life falls into this box, everything's going to be great. Then she will be happy. Then he will be happy. There's always this future fantasy thinking going on in our hearts when we are trauma bonded, because we're always making excuses and we think things are going to get better because we've been experiencing these intermittent moments of pleasure and validation and acceptance that are sometimes really freaking awesome. Like, they can be addictive, and it feels like a heroin addiction, or some type of any addiction really, where you're experiencing the lack and then all of a sudden you get the hit, and your brain can become addicted to this hit. And below the veil of consciousness, you're living in fear of never having that hit again. And this can keep you like a hamsters on a wheel, always seeking this person's validation, always hoping that they're going to return this amazing, awesome energy to you. And that very much keeps you stuck. So it's important that you recognize that you've been involved in a fantasy, that you had this idea that things are going to be great one day, and you might be attached to this fantasy. And it's really hard to face a trauma bond, see an abusive person for who and what they are, see how you may have enabled it, pushed family and friends away, didn't want to listen to people like your sister, your brother, people who loved you and were like, hey, something's up. You didn't want to listen. You didn't want to listen to your father or your mother who said, this is not going to work. It's so hard to wrap your mind around this idea that you have to let this go. What are you letting go of? You're letting go of a fantasy, right? And it's really, really important that if you're trying to break the trauma bond, and that's your intent for being here, that you recognize that grieving and letting go, it's like a death. You have to embrace it, right? You're in denial of it, then you start to get angry about it, you start to bargain, and then you go into depression, and finally acceptance. When you finally get to a point where you're feeling low about this, you're at a place where you accept that you have to release this fantasy, you're accepting, you're letting go of this trauma bond, and you know that a brighter future is ahead, even though you don't have all the pieces of the puzzle yet. The fear of the unknown is very scary, but I think staying in a relationship that can only get worse is more frightening. The next thing that you want to do, and this takes effort, right? It takes effort to change your life. It takes effort to change your habitual thoughts. So recognize that this is going to take effort. No one changes their life overnight. No one. I don't know anyone who has. I was able to turn my life around because I put so much time and effort into managing my thoughts and managing my emotions, into changing my thoughts and changing my emotions. It was a full-time job for me. And I was just so excited about the possibility that I absolutely knew, based on the work that I had done in psychology, based on my understanding of quantum mechanics and how the universe operates. I understood beliefs created ideas, created habitual thoughts, and our habits really create our lives. And I thought, well, if I can, get a hold of my beliefs and change them and develop new habits, then in time I absolutely will shift my world. But you also have to be patient. So you can't want this to just happen. This is a time-space reality we live in. Earth is a very dank reality, so things move very slowly. So I know this is like an instant manifestation world these days with Amazon Prime, and everything is just so instant. A text message, emails, FaceTiming, just everything is right here at our fingertips. It could cause our ego to be sort of resistant to this idea that changing our life is going to take time. But I can speak to you with confidence and with conviction, and I really hope that you're hearing me when I tell you that if you practice this, if you are patient, and if you are diligent, your life must change. It's the law, but you can't give up. Remember, human beings don't fail, they give up, or they never start. So if you're someone who decides to get on this path and you start and you hold on to it and you never give up, your life must change. That's my guarantee to you, but you can't ever give up, okay? So you want to start redefining what a healthy relationship looks like. It's going to take time to do this. So again, you sit down with your notebook and you ask yourself, what are my deal breakers? What are my must-haves, right? I learned this from being on the website eHarmony. That's actually how I met my husband, Anthony. And I thought it was brilliant the way they listed things. What are your must-haves and what are your deal breakers? And it got me really clear about what I would tolerate and about what I would not tolerate. One of my must-haves were I have to be in a relationship with someone who has empathy, with someone who is consistently empathetic. So I was going to be on the lookout for whether or not the next person in my life was able to be empathetic over the long haul, right? So being married to someone who's aloof, being married to someone who really didn't seem like he cared or he had any energy invested in creating a strong bond between the two of us, I was scarred by that. I decided I need somebody who has empathy. I need to be involved with someone who could actually reciprocate conversation. I need somebody who is in touch with their feelings. These were my must-haves. So make sure that you're making a list of must-nots or deal breakers and must-haves. Why? Because so oftentimes we find ourselves in the middle of relationships and we've been love bombed. We've been, there has been some idealization, so we feel validated and it feels good. Everybody likes that, we're not crazy because we like it. And then we get, blindsided by this really crazy experience, this really down in our experience, in our relationship. And we see a side of this person that is terrifying and, the bells and whistles are going off, but, we're on the hook. And then this person starts to make us feel like, well, it's your fault. Or they start excusing their own behavior, like, oh, I drank too much and that's why I acted that way. Or I had a really bad day at work and that's why I was abusive. Or, my mother called me today at work and that's why I took it out on you. And we're like, oh, okay, that makes sense, right? Okay. And then guess what? It happens again. And then there's another excuse. Or they up the ante and they bring flowers home this time, right? So there's this positive reinforcement. Or one of the things that I've heard in my past is you're so understanding. And so now it's like, oh my gosh, I have to be like misunderstanding, which means I can't hold you accountable because you've labeled me as misunderstanding. And so part of their manipulation is labeling you as understanding. They're giving you validation for being empathetic. So now it's like they're putting it out there into the universe, and now you can't be the person who has a boundary with them because you're the person they see as understanding, kind, considerate. You're a saint. You're their savior. They don't know what they would do without you. And so you're being primed, right? You're being labeled. And that all that's really doing is reinforcing the trauma bond and making it more difficult for you to stand in your power and say, enough is enough. Another thing I'd like you to consider on top of all of these other things is consider finding a trauma-informed therapist, a therapist who understands this type of trauma bond, a therapist who understands how difficult it's going to be for you to see things clearly in the beginning, a therapist who's going to understand that your reality has been messed with, right? You're not trusting your internal reality. You have been emotionally, psychologically manipulated by someone who is a fantastic actor, by someone who needed to feel superior to you, by someone who needed you to subjugate your feelings and your reality to their reality. This is going to take time to unwind. So my suggestion is when you're out and about and you're looking for a therapist, do some investigation and make sure you're dealing with someone who is absolutely trauma informed. Throw the word out there. Throw the word narcissist out there, throw the word psychopath out there, sociopath, and see if the person that you're dealing with says to you, yes, I have experience working with victims of narcissistic abuse. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that this session has helped you better understand a trauma bond. I hope it's helped you understand that the highs and the lows of a relationship, when they are built on really, really deep lows, and then you are reinforced with validation, and there's a lot of pleasure associated to the relationship, and you end up back there again, and people are trying to tell you something's wrong, and you hear yourself defending this person, feeling sorry for the person who's abusing you. If you feel yourself being walled off and isolated, you're doing it yourself, and or the abusive person, i.e. a narcissist, is isolating you. These are all the warning signs that you're in a trauma bonded situation. These are the warning signs that you're being manipulated to think that it's your fault. These are the warning signs of being reinforced that this intermittent validation or inconsistent validation is a part of your relationship, which is extremely damaging and it's toxic. You should be in a relationship with someone that you know loves you all the time. You should be in a relationship with someone who's emotionally stable, that you know what to expect from them. And even if they have a bad day, it's a once in a while type of thing, but they're owning it. They're taking responsibility for it. If you're in fear, that's a huge one. The huge red flag that you're in a trauma bond is that you're walking around in fear of not getting this person's approval, and you're walking around in fear of a negative outcome. So this is going to come down to each of us really evaluating where we are in our relationships. But you should not be afraid in your relationships. And if you are, this is a big red flag that you might be in a trauma bonded relationship with someone like a narcissist. Namaste, everybody. My name is Lisa A. Romano. I'm the Breakthrough Life Coach and best-selling author. And if you would like to learn more about my on-demand 12-week breakthrough coaching program that can help you heal from codependency and learn how to set boundaries and set your inner child free, just go to my website, www.lisaaromano.com. And if you would like to listen to my podcast, you can find it anywhere that podcasts are available. Check out my podcast, which is called Breakdowns to Breakthrough. And if you would like to learn more about my membership site, where you get to be part of a private Facebook community, check out the Breakthrough Warrior membership site. Namaste, everybody. Be careful out there. And remember, a narcissist doesn't want you to think. A narcissist wants you to feel. So when you're out and about, never forget to think. Bye for now. If you love this content, check out the next video. And don't forget to click the link below so you can take the codependency quiz.
That was exactly my experience, probably in the toxic relationship that I had about 3 years ago and endured. I had never heard of narcissism before. I had never heard of narcissistic traits. And so what I was going through was probably one of the most painful, existentially painful experiences of my life. And I had no idea that there was actually a specific pattern to my partner's behavior. I had no idea that there was actually an answer to why I was going through what I was going through and why I was feeling the way I was feeling, that actually there was an answer for all of it. I just assumed that I must be a horrible failure of a girlfriend or romantic partner. And it was just a world of pain. It was a world of hurt. And had somebody else that I really loved and cared about not said to me, I hate to bandy around, fancy psychological terms, but I'm telling you, I think that you've been dating somebody that's somewhere on the narcissistic spectrum. I think you should start reading about it, or trying to learn something about it to try to save yourself. I would have had no idea. It could have cost me a much longer time in extreme, extreme emotional pain. I just didn't know. I had no idea what I was going through because I didn't have the information in front of me.
Yeah, I think that is so important because we are we tend to be fixated on what's happening outside of us and or fixated on the turmoil inside of us. And in that space, we're not recognizing that there's a lack of awareness and
Absolutely.
there's a lack of information, right? So when I don't know that I'm in the throes of a codependent or narcissistic relationship, then I have no ability to escape the maze because this becomes my norm. Or like what you said, you just assumed it must be me. Like all of this chaos must be my fault.
Yes, and it's fascinating because, 3 years, flash 3 years forward, look the woman that I am now and the kind of work that I've done and the kind of awareness I have, I can look back. I can see the pattern from the courtship to the dumping and the discarding, all the manipulations. I understand it all. Had I been the woman that I am now, I don't think that we would have lasted past the third date, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And the
Mhm.
other thing too, and I've talked about this in the Facebook groups that I'm still connected to after doing, the breakthrough program, and with friends of mine that have gone through something similar, that when you are in relationship or tied to a very toxic partner who, even if they're not an actual, psychological study, clinical case of narcissism, but display high narcissistic traits, you are in a place where you are probably what I call bleeding out from high emotional reactivity. I
Mhm.
mean, you are I can only speak to my experience. As soon as things started going south, as soon as I was off the pedestal and the love bombing, as we call it, had happened, and I was a normal human being and a normal woman that had her own expectations and needs in a relationship, um, as soon as the first sort of mentally abusive or toxic uh, dance happened, I was then in a permanent state for basically the rest of the relationship in fight or flight. I
Mhm.
remember it. I'll never forget it because it was not only emotionally intense, but it was physically intense. So
Mhm.
I spent at least the latter half of the relationship in a constant sense of anxiety. My nerve endings were shot. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. I mean, you're basically just surviving from minute to minute.
Mhm.
And it if you are a codependent like I was, because that's the easiest prey, right? For somebody toxic to hook into. My only conscious thought was, how do I keep this person from breaking up with me?
Yep.
So you immediately go into this place of a fear of abandonment, wanting to hold on to this person that's basically trashing your nervous system, trashing your emotional system, um, you know, on some level being abusive. Um, and because you can't see the forest for the trees, first of all, on some level, you don't think that you're worthy of being treated any better, right? That's why you stay. But on top of that, there's just a sense of, I remember just a sense of just trying to take it minute by minute or hour or day by day. And my
Mhm.
modus operandi became, I believe everything this person is telling me. I basically drank the Kool-Aid, right, of all of their character assassinations and the way they would talk to me and, how they would try to control my behavior, what have you. And my only motive was I need to keep this person from breaking up with me. That
Yep.
was it.
Yeah.
So your world becomes tiny, like it just becomes really small, which is so sad.
Well, it goes back to, at least I feel, my opinion is it goes back to childhood when our world was small, when it was
Yeah.
us and the people that we loved. And all we wanted was, and what we needed and deserved was to try to figure out how to love and be loved. So,
Yes.
in essence,
Absolutely.
how do I prevent from being more emotionally neglected
Yes.
or
Absolutely.
completely emotionally annihilated? How do I keep from doing that? So, I think it's what you're saying is beautiful. And you're right, our world gets very small. I remember having the same feeling and then doing the emotional recovery work and recognizing, well, my world was small when I was a little girl. All I did care
Absolutely.
about was mommy and daddy, siblings, and that was it. And
Absolutely.
so it's not surprising when you take a giant quantum step back and you look at patterns and you're like, oh, wow. So my adult relationships became really small, which mirrored my relationships with the people that I loved when I was little.
Absolutely. I mean, with doing what is the word I'm looking for? Sort of doing the homework, right? Doing the journaling and being able to stay calm enough or be aware enough to look at the past
Mhm.
without getting emotionally flooded, which sometimes can be very difficult to do. It's like you kind of have to mine the past for your gold, basically, right? So the things as adults that we don't want to have to look at anymore um, actually can be the key that unlocks the door to our healing.
Absolutely.
As as somebody in my family once said to me, in many of the conversations that I had while trying to heal over the breakup and try to take better care of myself, they said to me, it's kind of like you went through all of the worst traits of one of your parents with none of the good ones. And it was
Yeah.
really interesting when they said that to me. And I can look back now, like I said, fast forward 3 years, and I can see that I have not only drawn to me, but chosen
Mhm.
romantic partners that allow me unconsciously to sort of do this toxic dance over and over and over again. And there's a very specific dynamic that replicates what was broken in
Mhm.
my relationship with my parents, especially my father, without
Mhm.
understanding. So that feeling that we get when we believe that the stars have aligned and this person must have been our soulmate in, past lives, it's unfortunately more likely that whatever your unconscious baggage is hooking onto that person's unconscious baggage, that the recognition is not familiarity. Because in healthy dating and healthy relationships, I've only learned in my mid 40s, actually, you understand that you can have a hope of having a good sense of somebody, but that it actually takes a really, really long time to get to know someone. It takes a long time to see who somebody really is. So that sense of intensity, intense, heightened, like intimacy within the first date, that just means that your baggage has recognized the other person's baggage,
Mhm.
and you're about to do lockstep into something that could end up causing a lot of pain, at
Oh,
the
yeah.
end. It's not your fault, but it's going to happen, you know?
Yeah, I've coached, I can't tell you how many men and women who are looking for that. They think the fantasy is the goal. They
Yes.
think that the fairy tale is the goal. And, that's why I always said, Walt Disney was a genius, but he screwed a lot of us up. Like
Absolutely.
we're thinking that Prince Charming is supposed to come and rescue us. And on the side of the men that I've coached, they have this hero thing going on. They feel excited and alive when they are rescuing or caretaking a woman.
Mm,
And so it's the women who are looking to be rescued in lots of the cases, at least that's what I've come across, and thinking that this man and or this relationship is in essence going to rescue me from my own loneliness. So it might not be the man, but it's the relationship. And we're talking about heterosexual relationships
yes.
right now. This goes across homosexual relationships for sure as
Absolutely.
well. But men that
Absolutely.
I've coached who are codependent, it is their need to be needed, or
Mm,
this idea that if she's in trouble and I can fix it, then I'm good. I am the prince. I am
mhm.
rescuing her. And so it's a hand in a glove. So little boys were watching Disney movies too,
Yes, absolutely.
So
And
I think what you're saying is amazing.
I'm glad. I mean, it took as I mean, it's taken me a lot of conscious work, over the past couple of years to get here. Um, but I think, what's fascinating to me now is that when I look back at the kind of relationships that I would immediately hook into, especially with this person that was really like I guess you could say that was my rock bottom. And the fallout of that relationship was so painful that I said to myself, I have to do something to change because
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm going to emotionally survive ever going through something like that again. So all I have control over is myself and my own behavior. But looking back now, the kinds of behaviors and patterns, especially early on in like the courtship phase,
Mhm.
which with toxic relationships tends to be like we've talked about, like the Walt Disney fantasy, right? It's every love song, right? It's every I'm a classical musician. It's every Italian love aria that you've ever heard that was written since 1850, right? This is a story that gets repeated over and over and over again. And we're sort of conditioned socially to believe that that's what we're supposed to look for. And not only that, but if we can't find it, that there's something wrong with us, right?
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is also which is also part of what's unhealthy. But I think of the traits now that I saw as valiant or sexy or attractive, and they're all red flags now, as the
Amazing.
every single one of them. So I will still get triggered, but instead of getting excited about somebody, or for instance, calling my sister up by the third date to say, I think I met the man that I'm going to marry. I mean, how many of us,
Mhm.
have been there before?
Mhm.
Instead, there's like a little red flag and an alarm bell that goes off that says, nope, don't go there. That's really, really dangerous. That's not good for you. Thank
I
God,
think
you know?
I think what a lot of people, for me, this was the missing piece of the puzzle, was the awareness piece or the
Mhm.
consciousness piece. That was the missing piece of the puzzle for me. Recognizing that my level of consciousness, the same level of consciousness that created the problem, was still recreating the problem. Sort of like
Absolutely.
Einstein, right? Einstein says you can't solve a problem with the same level of intelligence that created the problem. And
Absolutely.
so I was stuck in this like weird ectoplasm, purgatory. Like, what am I doing? And it was the awareness that, well, you're the common denominator. The-
Absolutely. That's the secret. Yeah.
Yeah, these men don't know one another.
Right.
They're all different types of narcissists, malignant, psychopathic, cerebral, somatic, all different types,
Mhm.
minor, garden variety, and then really bad. But
Yep.
you're the one. You're the constant, and that freaked me out,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and that's when
And
it
I
was, I'm doing something wrong.
yes, and I think that it takes a certain kind of this is also one of the things that I've learned. It takes a certain kind of humility, and it takes a certain kind of bravery, because you have to get to a point, I think, where it's more important to you to heal and to change from the inside than it is to try to lock down a new partner as soon as possible, right? I think of my friends and sort of I call them my tribe mates, right? The people that I've done your class with, that I've checked in, with other groups with or whatever. It takes a certain kind of bravery for somebody that craves relationship so much that it's really their modus operandi is to like enmesh with somebody because the feeling of being single or unattached feels like a fate worse than death, right? So you're asking somebody that's wired to believe that about themselves and about life to actually step away from maybe dating for half a second, and turn their inner eye inward and to be humble enough to be able to look at themselves and also take responsibility for their own behavior. Really, I call it putting on my big girl pants, you
Mhm,
know? And I got to the same place too, that I had all of these external reasons for why I was getting, I was going from one unhealthy relationship to the next. And it was always that partner's fault and bad timing and all this kind of stuff. And at a certain point, I too had to say, I am the common denominator in all of these relationships. And not only that, but uh, there's a saying, same wolf, different suit, that
mhm,
I sat down and started saying, why am I going through these cycles over and over again? And every time I engage with a new boyfriend, I think this is going to be the one, or I'm not going to screw up and I'm not going to act crazy. I'm going to be normal. I'm going to be the perfect girlfriend, which never happens. And every time it would blow up in my face, it would get worse.
mhm, mhm.
So, I think it takes a kind of bravery to say, all right, I really have to take a look at what I'm doing here. Because you're right. If you are the common denominator, you have to ask yourself, where is my responsibility in my own life, which can be really hard to do.
Well, I think it's you hear me say it all the time. Like,
Yeah.
people that embrace this journey, they are warriors. And someone who's outside of this type of recovery, unless you're doing it, you have no idea what someone who has come from an emotionally neglectful home, who associates all of this pain, the psychological pain, with being alone, and pleasure with attaching to just about anyone that's breathing.
That's right.
You have no idea. I mean, anyone who's outside of the recovery path and, is listening to this conversation, who has never been where you and I have been, they might think,
Yes.
how bad could it really be? Because you don't understand, right?
No,
Or you are lucky enough to, like, not have grown up aching to be loved, or aching
absolutely.
bone aching to be seen, or feeling like, for whatever reason, your parents didn't like you or couldn't love you or saw you as unlovable. And you're carrying
Absolutely.
this guilt and this unworthiness around with you, trying to figure out and thinking that the answer is outside of you, right? So if someone
Yeah,
loves me, then I'll be good enough, right? If I get married and I have kids and I have a house, I have a nice car, then that's it. That's what I should be striving for. And so we're spiritually bypassing all of these emotional wounds that we experienced as children, because we're still under the influence of unconsciousness. We don't realize that
absolutely.
we are not as conscious as we think we are. Just because you're
Absolutely.
walking and talking and breathing and eating and going to the bathroom 7 times a
Yep.
day does not mean you're conscious. It
No,
just means you're breathing. It,
absolutely.
yeah.
I'm so sorry. I was going to say the other thing too that I wanted to say for anybody listening is that, you can have a PhD, you can be one of the most empathetic, sensitive people in the world, right? And then one of the most well-educated, intellectually successful people in the world, and still be completely emotionally unconscious. That one has nothing to do with the other.
No, no, because to be conscious means that you've had that moment of humility, and you in that moment recognized, I thought that I knew everything, or I thought that I was aware, but yet I wasn't. That goes back to the humility that you were
Yeah.
speaking about. And also the bravery it takes to, like, stand there and go, oh my God, everything that I thought was true about my relationships might not be true. There might be a bigger story, and I might be a bigger part of it than I realized. Now, that is not to blame victims of narcissistic abuse, but this is to basically essentially recognize that if you are codependent, if you felt emotionally invisible your entire life, you are vulnerable to narcissistic abuse. And so it is important to recognize in yourself if you
Hmm.
feel like you don't have an identity, or if you feel like you don't know who you are, or if you are someone who attaches way too quickly and who goes right into fantasy thinking after 30 minutes on the first date because everything's going great in the first 30 minutes. If this is you and you have a history of being in relationships that fall apart, where you're getting abused and you're confused, it might be time to look at yourself and recognize, am I vulnerable to narcissistic abuse? And if so, then I have to start with me. I have to figure this out.
Absolutely. And I think making that point is really important, right? Because somebody who's susceptible to narcissistic abuse is usually coming from a place of an unconscious belief that they're broken, they're not lovable, they're not made of love, they are not worthy. So I think what makes someone in recovery so brave is that they have to then come up to face like the wall of shame, right? That comes up. So very, very early on in this kind of work that I was doing, there was a lot of piling on of shame and guilt. It took a lot of energy and a lot of mental energy to remind myself that it wasn't my fault, that my childhood had sort of programmed and wired me to have a Pavlovian response
Yep.
to a certain type of toxic hook. And I know that I've been talking about romantic relationships, but really, when I did the real work, my business relationships, some of my friendships had the same sort of toxic markers. And you're basically wading through a lot of painful childhood memories. You're you're taking account of your own behavior and your own patterns, and you have to be able to hold yourself with a lot of compassion when subconsciously or unconsciously, excuse me, you've probably been beating yourself up on a daily basis. Like, this is the hardest work I've ever done as a human being. I'm facing my demons. I'm sitting with really, really intense, uncomfortable emotions and just sitting with them and letting them pass. I'm trying to learn how to forgive myself for not knowing any better. But one of the things that always kept me going was, I think, something that you alluded to earlier on in the conversation, which is I'm tired of feeling like I'm a victim in my own life. I'm tired of feeling excited about somebody and this is finally going to be the one, and then my life blows up in my face, right? As soon as I became aware that there was actually an answer for why I went through the way that I went through, it was unbelievably empowering. I thought, oh, well, if this is what has been going on, then I can actually do something about it. I don't have to sit and be passive. And the one belief that I had always held, regardless of any low self-esteem or, codependent thinking, for lack of a better term, is that I believed that as I changed from the inside, that what the world and my life reflected to me would change. I always believed that. It had shown up for me in other parts of my life and my career and my creative life. So I thought, if I was able to do that for the other things that I cared about, I can do that for my relationships too. And it's something I remember hearing you say just this past month, this is the most important job of my life. And I consider this kind of work, checking in with myself, journaling, writing about my feelings, observing my gut reactions, if I feel stuck on something, or if I get triggered, because the triggers never go away, right? But how we react to them and the time we spend on them starts changing. Writing through my triggers if I'm feeling stuck, taking care of myself and forging a new path and new patterns in my behavior to get me to where I want to go is the most important job of my life. And it's going to be my job for the rest of my life. It's not like I took the 12-week course and
Mhm.
now I'm the Dalai Lama and you know, and everything's perfect. And I'm now, like a public speaker for like self-care. No, I mean, it's a really intense journey, and there's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and falling off the horse, and dating a jerky guy for like only 6 months or 6 weeks instead of 6 years, and then you remember and you go back to the work. But I think about how much my life has changed in the past 3 years, and it's amazing. I mean, I'm already not the same person, really. I'm the version of myself that I was hoping I could get to and scared that I would never get to, but
Yeah.
not without a lot of work.
Well, I think that's it. Like, I've coached so many people in my career, and there are people who think, fix me. Let's have a couple of coaching sessions so that you can fix me. And I tell them, I can't.
Yeah.
I can help you fix yourself, but I'm telling you, these are tools that you have to diligently practice. You have to become your number one, like you were saying, priority or job. Healing
Yeah.
yourself, learning how to connect to your emotions, learning how to trust yourself where you are right now. Like we were saying last night in the group, the way I learned to trust myself was day by day. So if I had an emotional experience on Monday, I trusted that feeling then. If on Tuesday I had a different outlook, then I trusted that. If Wednesday my perspective changed, I trusted that. It was literally walking myself through every moment and just trusting where I was in the moment and knowing that, you know what, in a year from now, my opinion might change, but for now, this is how I feel. It was the only way to reorient myself with my emotions. And there were times that it was easier than others, but codependents generally don't know what they feel or how they feel. And they live in such denial of not even having a self. You don't know that you don't have a self.
Oh
And you
God. Yes.
you don't know that. And so when I learned that, I was like, wow, I don't know what I think. I don't know what I feel and I don't know who I am. I am an absolute shell. I am a mom that wakes up and does a certain amount of things every day. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
business owner and a wife and a daughter, and I do those things. But
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, the person that is the essence at the core of all of that, I am not in the building. And that
Yeah.
terrified me.
I remember it's interesting because, at a very young age, I went to a very, very prestigious music school and, was on my way to, on the outside to anybody else, would look like a very, illustrious, fancy career. And I will never forget just being scared of everything.
Hmm.
I had no faith in my ability to take care of myself. I remember I would be emotionally tortured on the inside and frozen with
Hmm.
indecision. I also understand that that's also part of trauma. That's also part of like PTSD, right? There's fight or flight, there's fawning, and then there's freezing.
Yep.
I didn't realize it was because I had no sense of self, right? Because I was a smart girl and I was a good student and I was seen as a wonderful friend. I was so empathetic and loyal and all the nice things that make me me. But when it came to my own sense of self, I had absolutely none. I had no trust at all in my own instinct. I had no faith that I was capable of making the right decision. And I also had this unbelievable sense of fear that if I made the wrong decision, God was going to punish me. And
Yes.
why? Because I grew up in a family with a father who would say things to me like, you don't have a right to an opinion. This is my house. Like
Hmm.
there was no discussion at the dinner table if something happened in the house that upset me, or I felt like he was bullying my mom or my sister or was being mean to me. There was no discussion in which we even bandied about a difference of opinion. It was that I had no right to an opinion.
Yep.
And then I had a mother who would completely invalidate anything that I went through. I remember being told from a young age, oh, you came out of the womb oversensitive.
Hmm.
I would never say those things to you. That I literally had a mother who would say things to me like, oh, that never happened. Why do you have to be so oversensitive all the time? So
Hmm.
what do you think is going to happen? The child that gets treated that way is going to, they're set up. The cards are stacked against a child like that. They will grow into an adult that does not have the life skills or the sense of self-worthiness to know who they are. I think a sense of self, one of the things that I've learned is my sense of self is that I know who I am. I know what's good about me. I know my flaws that I will lovingly work on. But I also know that I have a right to my feelings. I have a right to feel them because they're mine and I'm a loving and worthy person. And
Hmm.
from my gut instinct and from the things that I like and I don't like, that's how I start building out my life. But having to sit yourself down at 42 and say, or 43 and say, well, what do I like? You
Hmm.
know, do I like biking? Do I really like working out? What do I do? I mean, it's really, really profound. And this other concept too of what happens when you start getting knowledge. I remember telling somebody, I used to feel like I was walking around my life in a house, in a fun house room of mirrors.
Mhm.
That part of the panic was that I couldn't tell what was real
Mhm.
because I couldn't trust my instinct.
Yep.
And now I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly what I want, and I know I'm going to go for it.
Mhm.
But it took at least 3 years of work every day on some level to get here. But it's a terrifying, terrifying way to live. And my heart goes out to the people that in their adult lives are still living from that reality because you're trapped.
Mhm.
It's an unbelievable amount of emotional pain on a daily basis. It's like nothing I would ever wish on anybody.
Yeah, and so many people are in that. So many people have this loss of self and are being abused, gaslit, projected upon, trauma bonded, abandoned, discarded, convinced that they're the reason that they're being discarded. They're the reason that they're being cheated on. Their sense of self is just being twisted and twisted, and they slip further down this rabbit hole each and every day.
Yeah.
And to me, it's just not fair. I think, like you've probably heard me say, like what motivates me is this idea that adult children that are born to these situations, like you said, it's stacked against them because they have not had enough love. In order to feel yourself or to feel in touch with the self, you had to have someone who reached into your psyche and made you feel seen. And if
Absolutely.
you don't have that psychic experience of this other, which I think is always interesting that the word other is in the word mother, remove the M, there's mother,
Mm.
you know. And so here is this other that we look up to. And if they don't see love in us, then our subconscious mind does not get impregnated, if you will, or impressed with this idea of love. And if it doesn't, then you can't connect to the love that you are. And so
Absolutely.
you end up, walking around in the desert for 40 years, right? Looking, love me, please love me,
Absolutely.
love me,
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's
So,
so sad because you're right. And then it becomes this, I mean, in my own experience, again, um, it was this vicious cycle. I mean, all of these things, it was like, I call it like the poo-poo platter of like toxic behaviors, right? So in this relationship that I was in, this is a perfect example. So I got love bombed. I thought that this was the man that was going to save me. I used to believe that I couldn't be seen as a legitimate human being or attractive or worthy unless I had a boyfriend, and I was a late
yeah,
bloomer to start with. So
yeah.
that was already, I was coming to dating from a very, very unhealthy place because I had no standard. As you said a little bit earlier, like my standard was, I used to say to my sister, I'm like, is he breathing and is he off life support? He'll do. It's like that. Anything like any attachment to anybody,
Mhm.
was better than the misery of being alone. And for anybody listening, like, I'm still single now and I'm living my best life and I love it. Like, if I
Awesome.
meet somebody in the future one day, great, but I don't need to meet somebody to be happy. I never thought I would be the woman that said that, but there it is. But
Amazing.
I will never forget this guy. It was, I just I can't believe what people endure. It gets me really angry, because people set themselves up to be punching bags. So I had an experience with this toxic ex-partner that he gave me, I'll never forget this. He gave me a piece of candy to try
Mhm.
that was sent overseas from his family. And I tried it and I didn't like it. And I felt like I was being rude. So I ate half of it and I let go of the other half. And he started fixating on the fact that I didn't eat the other half of the candy. And Lisa, this turned, I kid you not, into him getting so angry at me that he kind of snapped,
Mhm.
and we were already in bed at night. And so, I was in a vulnerable place,
Yep.
and him being angry that I didn't eat the rest of the piece of candy turned into him yelling and screaming at me. At one point, I thought that he might actually slap me across the face. He was getting purple in the veins from all of his yelling. And for an hour and a half, I stood there while he basically assassinated my character. And I got a tongue lashing over all of the things that were horrible about me, right? And then he threatened that if I walked out the door, that he was going to break up with me. And then what did I do? I stayed because I didn't want him breaking up with me.
I hear you.
And then the next day, perseverated over what a horrible girlfriend I was and how I was 2 inches away from this quote unquote love of my life, wonderful man, only chance at happiness dumping me. I mean, this is actually the mentality. I actually felt what I felt worthy of was being abused. I thought that I deserved to be abused that way.
Yeah.
Never again. But my heart breaks because I know that there's so many people out there. I mean, I got out after yet less than a year, but we know of people in the breakthrough group and the 12-week group that endured marriages and long-term partnerships, men and women, decades of abuse behind closed doors like that,
For me, it always made sense to figure out what's wrong. Right? Because if you can't identify the problem, then you're never going to find a solution. And what happens in these toxic relationships is, in most cases, one of the partners is extremely passive. And so, but being passive doesn't work because it continues the abuse. So learning to set boundaries, but then again, if you're dealing with a narcissist, boundaries don't work. There's no such thing as a boundary with a narcissist. There is only, I'm not tolerating this, and no contact.
Right.
That's the only thing that works, because narcissists will just continue to try to hoover you back in and love bomb you and get you right back into the cycle again. And the goal really is, once, level 1 is complete, love bomb, it's like mission accomplished. Now, the second level is, let's see how much or how many insults in a day she can tolerate. Let's see how much nitpicking she can tolerate or he can tolerate. Oh, let me pick on the way that she chews her food, or let me pick on his children. Let me find a way to say something about the way he spends money. It's just upping the ante. And can I convince this person that they are everything I believe they are, which is negative? And then can I convince them they're responsible for why I'm abusing them?
Absolutely.
It's such a horrible way to live. And so the whole idea is really awareness. And I think that what really helped me was identifying this idea that, okay, so Lisa, the problem is that A, you seek approval and you fear a negative outcome. So it was a pump, right? So Lisa was somewhere in the middle, but I had to break through the pump. Like, I seek approval, but I fear a negative outcome. So there's the pain versus pleasure principle at work. The pleasure I'm seeking is your approval. And the fear I'm trying to avoid is you breaking up with me.
Absolutely.
And in that space, I am on a psychological, spiritual, and emotional hamster's wheel. And I can't get off because I don't see the problem. This is my norm.
Yes.
And so people like you and myself have a conversation, someone listens to it, and they start to think, oh, maybe that's what's wrong. Maybe I'm too passive. I took a very practical approach to my recovery, thinking I needed to see this in very bite-sized pieces, tangible pieces that made sense. And like, oh, I seek approval. That's bad. And I fear negative consequences. That's bad, because if I fear negative consequences, I'm going to avoid setting boundaries. If I fear if I fear negative consequences, then I'm going to be afraid to say, this is what I think and this is what I feel, because I'm afraid you might disagree with me, disapprove of me, criticize me, or abandon me. And so that's why I needed to move away from being afraid of the negative outcome, which is why even when I met my husband, what came up for me is, well, what if he cheats on you, right? This is a very common fear. And I just looked that fear in the face and I said, and what if he does?
Absolutely.
A, it's going to be the dumbest thing he's ever done, because I am a very loyal person. I will only have eyes for him. I will work very hard at trying to be a wonderful partner. So if he does something like this, that's going to be a really dumb thing for him to do. And
Mhm.
if he does, then that's okay. I'm going to land on my feet because I cannot be with someone, and I'm just speaking for myself. I cannot be with someone that I have given everything to and has taken that for granted and has gone this far to actually have an affair. Because as you and I both know, things just don't happen. There's an
Yes.
invitation to have this happen. It starts with the flirting. It starts with, hey, can I have your number? It starts with, oh, let's go for coffee. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens before the affair.
Yeah,
And you're living with me? I'm washing your socks? Like, what?
absolutely.
Like,
Yeah.
no, I'm very sorry. Like, I can't be with you. So because I know I'm not afraid of a negative outcome anymore, I'm not
Right.
afraid of it anymore. So now I'm free to move laterally in the now experience. I'm not
Mhm.
afraid anymore. I am myself. And I know that if any of my relationships fail, I still have myself. I mean, we're having a very philosophical conversation of,
You know,
I mean, Socrates should be sitting on the couch listening,
I know. But I
like,
think, but it's like the conversation that we're having, to me, I know that everybody's different, but over the past 3 years now, I've had so many conversations with people that have gone through the same thing. This is the kind of stuff that actually goes through your head. Like,
yes,
this is actually the work. This is the questioning and the looking at it. And, it's interesting because one of the traits that I used to put up with, right, because I was sort of wired to in my toxic relationships, is that the men that I would be drawn to were always sexually inappropriate with
yeah,
other women. I mean, and, speaking of narcissistic traits, we talk about like flying monkeys and stuff. Well, my ex had something that I called a harem, and he
mhm,
had this circle of women friends.
yep,
And I will never forget that my gut told me early, early on that there was something that was not platonic at all about these supposed friendships.
right,
And the first time that I went to him and said, I'm not there. I know as a woman that this woman is in love with you. If she got so upset with you when you told her that you met somebody and you started dating me that she didn't want to talk to you anymore, that's a woman that's in love with you.
yeah,
And what happened? I got gaslit. I got shamed. I was told that I was being jealous and controlling, and I didn't love him enough and I didn't trust him. And so, as a codependent, I sort of ate it hook, line, and sinker.
totally.
And now I'm in a place where, again, it comes back to the self, right? I
Mhm.
would love to meet somebody. I would love the chance to have the experience of what a healthy, loving, joyful, long-term partnership feels like before I kick the bucket. That would be awesome.
So,
But speaking of pain and pleasure principle, I have enough pleasure in who I am as a person. I love my life and I love who I am, that I understand as human beings, I could meet the most wonderful man in the world and it might not work out. People cheat, people fall, people grow apart. People get widowed earlier than they're expecting to become widowed. I mean, in the end, if you like who you are and you live life for yourself and your relationship is just uh, parallel to the life that you've already built for yourself, it's very, very different. You're not losing yourself in the other. I think that when you're still coming, again, I can only speak for myself. When I have been in a place of codependency, and I have made I've given a person outside of myself the power to tell me that I'm good or that I have a right to be happy or exist. I've completely lost myself. It's over before it even started, you know?
yeah, I think
Um,
and also that we have to recognize that I just cut you off. I'm so sorry, Rachel. You want to
no,
keep
no, no, it's okay.
so sorry. I just heard myself cut you off and go, Lisa, you just cut her off.
No, we're just having a conversation.
I'm so sorry. I think what is important all of this, the whole conversation is really important. It's so multi-layered. We've touched on so many different things, being true to yourself, knowing yourself, honoring yourself, recognizing, having the awareness to recognize when you are losing yourself, right? But it's sort of like, how do you lose a marble you never had? You can't.
Absolutely.
And so the first part of the journey is to really recognize that I don't have a self in this relationship. And that's terrifying because if you're in a relationship with someone who's more, let's say, narcissistic, that person likes it that way.
Absolutely.
And you have to have the strength to say, I recognize that I don't have a self in this relationship. And that's why this is working.
Yeah.
Because once a codependent says, wow, I don't have a self, and my wife, my husband, my boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, they're very comfortable in this dynamic. Now, what do I do? It goes back to the humility and the bravery it takes to go, wow, I don't know where I'm going, but I know I can't stay. And
Absolutely.
I'm walking out into the unknown.
Hmm.
And how terrifying is that? Because most likely, if you're codependent, you're struggling with this other thing. You're attached to other people too. Can you speak to that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I, I mean, again, looking back with like the power of hindsight, I, I've always been lucky in the fact that I've had a small circle of very close friends, and those friendships have been very healthy. But I mean, outside of the romantic relationship, I had some very toxic, I had a string of toxic friendships when I was younger. Interestingly enough, I would usually attach myself in friendship to women that they themselves were very narcissistic and very beautiful, and I would live vicariously through them, right? And I was the safe person to be around because I was a shell of a person, so they got to have the spotlight the whole time, right? I had a string of toxic business relationships with managers. A healthy business relationship is supposed to be an equal partnership, right? In which two people are getting business done together. And I had more than one artist manager that was abusive and would play mind games and manipulate and be controlling, while I was giving them 25 to 20% of my paycheck. I mean, there was a lot of, at the time that I became aware, which was around the spring to summer of 2018, I had to start unhooking all of these other people
Yeah.
in my life. And speaking of the pain and pleasure principle, I was in a place where I had started the 12-week graduate course. I was leaning on the few close friends that I knew loved me for me, and they put up with me talking about this stuff on like a daily basis. But it was definitely going into a sense of, I remember thinking to myself, is this my midlife crisis? I'm 40 something. I don't know who I am. I don't know who I am in relationship to like dating. I don't even know what country I want to live in. I don't know what's going on. It was really intense, and I'm not going to say that it got worse before it got better. It got more emotionally intense before I got to a place where I was able to unhook from a lot of emotional reactivity. But there were a lot of people, not only were there a lot of people that I said goodbye to, but this might have happened to you. As soon as I started changing from the inside and started really living for myself, there were people that just kind of fell by the wayside, that because they couldn't maybe hook into me the way that they used to, they had no use for me, or we literally weren't, it's such a crunchy thing to say, vibrating on the same plane anymore.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I wish them the best, but it's yeah, there was a lot had to fall apart before it started getting put back together, I think.
Yeah, I found that the relationships that were good got better, and the relationships that were just completely fell apart. And
Yeah.
I was rather shocked by some of the relationships that could not stand a more authentic Lisa.
Yeah. I
I
was
was,
surprised by that too. And that was hard. That was painful. You know, some of the people that I
oh yeah,
trusted were my closest confidants just kind of disappeared. That was kind of
yeah.
shocking.
Yeah, that was like, wow. Cause like people that you think would have been like supporting you in your change were kind of like ticked off that,
Yeah.
that you were finding yourself and you weren't as available. You
Yes.
didn't want to go out or whatever it was. You just, because as a codependent, you can be a chameleon. Yeah, I'll go. You hate going wherever they're going. Yeah, I'll do that. You don't really want to do that, but you're like, okay, because again, we go back to this hamster's wheel. I'm seeking approval and I'm afraid of a negative outcome. So if I say no to this, iconic female in our group, that is the leader of our group, if I say no, then I'm losing her approval and she might discard me. And
Yes,
so when
absolutely.
when you start to recognize that you do that in codependent recovery and you start to hold yourself accountable and you stop doing that, it's like earthquake,
Yes.
earthquake. And then you have to stand there while your entire world is quaking and like, who's going to be left? Like, who's going to
Absolutely.
be sticking around after this world stops shaking? Because this is really the next version of me. This is who I really am.
This is who I really am. And, and for anybody that's listening, right, who might be recognizing themselves and what they've been through in this conversation, who hasn't maybe started taking some of the steps to take care of themselves and start drawing some boundaries and putting themselves first. I'm here to I feel like I'm the ghost of Christmas future, like, but a good one. I'm here to say that it's worth the pain of the unknown. That it's the pain of the unknown and everything sort of shifting around you is more than worth the joy and the freedom and all the ways that you're hoping and wishing that your life will change in the future. I mean, I think I just thank my lucky stars that at the time that I needed the help the most, I was able to get it. You know what I mean? To get to where I am now. That if you know that you're miserable in your life right now, or feeling caught, or feeling like you're stuck and a victim, the only way to get to the other side is going through the muck, but you'll get through it and life is going to open for you and change for you in ways that are even better than you could have imagined. Believe me, it's worth the fear or the pain of sitting with the unknown is worth it, because it actually has a much more positive outcome than the pain that you're living with day in and day out right now, which we know is not only not going to change, but it's just going to get worse, you
Yeah.
know?
You have to know your why, right?
Yes.
So you have to know your why. Why am I going through this pain? Because I want something different, because I want to know what it is to love myself. I don't
Yeah.
want to be in toxic relationships anymore. I'd rather be by myself than, be in a toxic relationship. And so if you stay focused on the why, then while you're in the state of pain, you can rationalize and say, okay, well, I'm in pain because I want this why. When
Mhm.
I was going through my divorce and taking kids out of school, starting over a new school, moving to one town over, I mean, it was completely turned our lives upside down. But I kept telling myself, I know why. I don't
Mhm.
want my children to grow up helpless, learned helplessness and codependent and stomping their feet instead of acknowledging how they feel and moving laterally if they have to,
Mhm.
and setting boundaries if they have to. And so this is why I will endure this pain. So that might help someone also. I read a meme once back in the early days of the internet that said, the bridge doesn't appear until you jump. Changed
Yes.
my life. I was like, oh, because as you know, when we have quantum conversations, you can only experience what you cling to and what you've always
Mhm.
known. And so letting go of what you have is an opportunity to create something entirely new. But your brain is going to freak out because your brain prefers the familiar because it understands the maze. Even if it's a toxic maze, your brain understands the toxic maze. So venturing out is not something that the brain, the amygdala, is going to want to do. And that's why this is also a conversation about consciousness.
Mhm.
Because if you can raise your awareness around, wow, my brain is freaking out right now, that's normal because you're
Mhm.
stepping out to an unknown. You don't
Absolutely.
have the pathways yet. You don't have the experience yet. You don't have the routine yet. You're building it as you go. And I think that's what a lot of people fear the most is like, but I don't know where I'm going. You're right. And when we step out of the old and we step into the new, we have to recognize we're literally building the pathway one brick at a time. And today, in this moment, is enough. It's enough,
Absolutely.
you
Yes,
know?
you don't have to be superwoman. Absolutely. Sometimes, like, I mean, I remember, in my past, like the day that, uh, I didn't work out and I didn't do what I said I was going to do in my task list, but an ex-boyfriend texted me and I didn't answer him back. That was still a huge victory. I mean, as long as you're doing what you can to take care of yourself, there were whole months where I would go through a mild depression or feeling stuck or anxious or, backslide into some unhealthy codependent behaviors. And it was the best that I could do at the moment. But in my mind, my eye was on the ball of still moving forward. And then I would kind of dust myself off and get up and, and try again and go back to journaling. And I mean, not like I said, like not every day. I haven't turned into the Dalai Lama,
Mhm.
but even in a messy process, or uneven process, I still moved so much farther. And the other thing too is, I mean, I learned this through you and I've been doing a lot of reading and, um, watching videos, taking classes about the brain. When you make a choice that is different than what your compulsive behaviors or your old patterns of behaviors would have you do, you're building a new neuron in your brain.
Mhm.
So the bricks are literally like the neurological pathways in your brain. And I
Mhm.
said to somebody, and I think I said this to you before, it's like, I've spent some time like working out hard in the gym and like working with a personal trainer. It's like a physical effort. It's like if every day was leg day for your brain, you know, it's like the gym of the mind. It's a mental effort to say, I'm going to try something different. Nope, I'm not going to start beating myself up. Nope, I'm not going to go down that avenue to pickling or brining in bad feelings or perseverating about the past. I'm choosing to think about what I want to get done today and what I'm setting my goals are. What are my goals for tomorrow? And I'm going to choose to thinking about the future. It's actually a physical effort, but by doing it, the payoff is immense. It's
Yeah.
totally worth hard work.
I think
It's
it
truly.
helps to recognize toxic behavior and go, oh, okay, that's a problem, right? So separating ourselves and disidentifying, in other words, like finding the space in our minds so that we can do this work, right? So recognizing toxic behavior for what it is, recognizing gaslighting, projection, smear campaigns, triangulation, like, oh, okay, those are all really bad things, right? So
Yes.
recognizing it, that gives you a little bit of space to go, okay, and what is the outcome? Oh, I feel X, Y, and Z. Oh, I
Mhm.
am seeking approval and I am afraid of him or her berating me. Oh, okay. So where is this space where I get to choose? Like, do I want to live like this anymore? And like what you're
Absolutely.
saying, like one of the huge breakthrough moments for me was when I realized that the voices in my head were basically, well, how would I explain? It was sort of like the smell that was coming up from the basement. In other words, like,
Mhm.
when your basement smells, like you're like, it's not you, it's your programming, right? And
Absolutely.
recognizing that you're bad, you're no good, you're unlovable, you're infinitely broken, don't know what's broken, you're just broken. This is the
Mhm.
best it's going to get. You should settle. No one really loves you. People just tolerate you. This is
Mhm.
literally, these were the impressions that were, impregnated, if you will, in my subconscious mind. And so during the course of the day, this is what seeped through the conscious level, right? So from
Yeah.
my subconscious mind into the conscious field that how would you say, my awareness is now aware of, like you're this and you're that, you're fat, you're not skinny enough, you've got spider veins, you look like crap today. Like, and
Mhm.
learning to like observe those thoughts and go, wait a minute, that is not the language of love.
Absolutely.
I should have these thoughts about myself should never have been planted or seeded into the subconscious mind ever.
Yeah.
And now, on a neurological level, these thoughts have created neurological pathways, neurons that fire together, stay together.
Yeah.
And so now, in my state of unawareness, I'm believing what I'm hearing. And I don't have the
Mhm.
space to go, wait a minute, these voices are not of the divine, right? They're of faulty patterns. They're representation of my mother's projection, stuff that she maybe couldn't figure out and integrate within herself. Whatever, it's not me. These are not my thoughts. These are not self-generated. This is leftover stuff. And what am I going to do to
Absolutely.
fix it? And
Yeah.
becoming aware, like, oh, that's why in the program we say, is that a codependent thought or is that a self-generated thought? What is that? And learning to observe yourself, metacognition.
Absolutely. It's interesting because that was the first big breakthrough for me when I realized not only that there was a reason why
Mhm.
I believed what I believed about myself, but that it wasn't my fault. And that was also very healing too, right? Because it goes a long way to healing the shame. And then it becomes empowering because it's like, oh, if it's not my fault and I was sort of wired by my, highly unstable, family life to believe these things about myself, I actually get to choose to believe something different. Like it's not something that's written in stone, and it's just a it's like liar, liar, pants on fire. It's like none of these things are real, none of these things are true, and I can work towards what I believe about myself. That was unbelievably empowering, and it gave me something to hold on to, absolutely. And that's where for me, that's when I really started digging in, because I had the confidence that I can do this, right?
Yep.
Armed
Yep.
with the right information. And now, I mean, I used to be somebody who's I felt like I was getting buffeted around by life. And really looking back, it's because my own emotional reactivity was
Mhm.
leading me by the nose. I remember you had used this image that I thought was so wonderful, that when you're in a place of being healthy, it's like all of your feelings and reactions and, beliefs or whatever are like this sea. You know what I mean? It's like this ocean. And when you're in a place of being able to step back and observe what's going on instead of drowning in it, instead of like being taken over by the waves, it's like you're on a surfboard gliding over and able
Yep.
to look down and see what you're doing.
Mhm.
I was just, yeah, I mean, I was a very passive, victimized person. It wasn't my fault. That's how I was wired. Now I'm in a place where I'm just a lot calmer as a person. I set my lists for the day. I journal like in the morning, in the evening. I do my little meditations. So now what happens, and I think it's important to say, is that it doesn't mean that you become this weird automated robot that never feels anything, right? And if I spent the first 40 something years of my life being emotionally reactionary, right, and having triggers, those are not going to go away tomorrow. They might not ever go away. But
Mhm.
now what happens is that I spend much, much less time and much less energy falling off the surfboard and drowning. I do
Yep.
much less drowning now. And
Really.
I'm also able to catch myself much better before I fall off the surfboard,
Wow.
for lack of a better term. And these are changes that were gentle and just happened over time. It's like rinse, wash, repeat. You yourself said, it's like observation and repetition.
Mhm.
Over time, you're building new behavioral patterns. And I know that my work isn't even close to being done, but I've already, like I said, come a really far way from August of 2018.
So wonderful,
Um,
Rachel. Yeah,
yeah,
it's so wonderful. I think if the real problem, and it sounds hokey pokey, but the real problem is a lack of love. And
absolutely.
The real problem is not ever feeling at a heart level that the people that you loved and needed to loved you for who you were, that they saw you, that they valued you, that they felt like you were important. Love was not conditional, it was unconditional. You felt like
Mhm.
you had an anchor. And
Yeah.
I don't believe that children who grew up feeling unloved, I just know that it takes a lot for us to learn how to believe that we are lovable and to believe that it is possible to flow love towards ourselves. And I think that's what shame does. Shame makes it impossible for us to release the energy that's associated with a trauma. And then we become arrested. The energy stays in our body and we can't rationalize it. We can't look at it logically and pull it apart and go, oh, wait, I'm really not bad. Mom just had a bad day. Or I'm really not unworthy. My father just doesn't know how to communicate. Like we're little. We don't have those cognitive abilities, but the feelings stay there. And as we age, we end up developing behaviors that mirror and recreate this pattern in our adult lives. And it's only when we break through, and sometimes it's a breakdown that leads us to a breakthrough, where everything
Absolutely.
that we've learned and everything that we've believed in literally just completely falls away at the wayside. And we are left there, on the precipice of the unknown, going, I don't know where I'm going, but like I said, I can't stay. Um,
Mhm.
and sometimes it's those narcissistic relationships that push us to that point. I know that
Absolutely.
if it wasn't for the pain that I experienced from the other, then I wouldn't have been able to really get my life together.
Mm.
And like I said, it's no one's fault to be abused by a narcissist. By no means am I saying it's ever someone's fault if they find themselves in an abusive relationship. My
Mhm.
main agenda in life is really to raise awareness around and for those who are vulnerable to narcissistic abuse so that they can be empowered with the knowledge and information they need. And with stories like yours of tremendous hope and this idea that it doesn't happen overnight. We're talking about a 3-year journey for you, right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
helping people be realistic. This is going to take time, but you
Yep.
can do it. So empowering
Absolutely.
that person to believe that it is possible with enough information that they want to do this work. They want to be humble and they want to be brave. So I just want to thank you for your time today and your story and your light. And
You're
there's no doubt in
so
my mind that you're
welcome.
going to continue to expand that light and, just be on the lookout for everything that you've wanted to manifest because it is on its way to you.
I now actually believe that. And I'm so excited to continue on this journey and just keep opening up to life. And I thank you for your work. Part of my breakthrough was finding you online, watching hours and hours and hours of your YouTube videos going, oh my God, why does this lady know every single secret thing that happened in this relationship that I thought was so special and unique? And then starting the work with, the 12-week breakthrough. And for anybody listening, Lisa did not ask me to mention it. This was just happened to be my journey.
Yeah.
And I just thank you for your work. And I'm really looking forward to continuing to do the work with you online and letting life open up. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, yeah. Just keep, the answer is always going to come back to love, no matter
Absolutely.
what situation, no matter when we're upset, when we're angry, when we're hostile, when we're irritated. The answer will always be love, some form of love, loving myself, loving someone else, letting go of something you're not supposed to be trying to control. Wrapping the arms of love around a fear, believing that you're good enough. It's always going to come down to love. And it's literally just a decision and a feeling away. So always remember that, just keep
Absolutely.
impressing your subconscious mind with love and you're going to be okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Yeah. Thank you, Miss Rachel. I appreciate it so